and I were just joking that it was a little too quiet. We've been talking for a while this morning, just warming up. It is 8 a.m. here in Rapid City, so good morning to everyone. This is only my first cup of coffee, so I hope you are all getting ready and well caffeinated for the day. Thank you for so much for joining us. Our session today is not a light topic: how careers in design and construction can influence social change. So Kitty and I are mostly going to be telling you a story, but because I'm a good project manager, I made you an agenda. That seems like a really broad topic, right? Social influence and social change, and there's so much talk about that right now. So we wanted you to have an idea of this like arc of the journey that we're going to go on. And we're going to talk about some preconceived notions, like what we think we know. We're going to talk about what civic engagement looks like, which has a lot to do with challenging what we think we know. And we're going to talk about the value of diversity, and that's what we're going to close with, because that's how we make for a better future and how we challenge ourselves to do better. So, like I was saying, we're going to be telling you a story, and Katie and I are both really fast talkers, and we use our hands a lot. So just bear with us, like chill back and relax. Please use the chat box. We're going to go through our story, and then we're going to have enough time to go through and have conversations and answer some of your questions. So through history, architecture has reflected society physically, right? Like it's a concrete thing. How people choose to build, and what they build is in large part how we, times after, like many years after, have come to understand their values, their ways of life, their successes, and even some of their downfalls. From fortified structures for defense that span 13,000 miles, reaching from the desert to the sea, to grand Colosseums for entertainment that could fit over 50,000 people, to the various houses and buildings that make up the city, we can really learn a lot. All of those things that they leave behind for us to learn from, combined with our new, better understanding of human behavior and our new consciousness around climate change and the environment, we can start to understand how architecture can actually affect people. So Katie and I are going to share our thoughts and our work with you on how we can influence social change and impact society. I am Patri Acevedo. I'm an architect in Rapid City, and I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. In school, I was your typical good student, hard worker, fairly involved, good at the STEM courses, sciences and math, but also the kind of kid who found that like her voice through the arts, debate, music, photography. So when time came to pick a career field, my teachers strongly recommended engineering. The math was kind of obvious, pardon my pun. Girl, good at math, involved student, and they weren't wrong, but they weren't totally right either. Like most prospective college students, I had the chance to visit the engineering school at the University of Puerto Rico, and I walked around the campus and I saw what students were working on in the research labs, and I asked a ton of questions. You know, I sort of checked the boxes, like I did everything that I was supposed to do, and I found the work really intriguing and challenging, but it was just not perfect for me, so I just had to keep searching.
And as Patri said, I'm Katie Becker. I'm an architect and a K-12 planner in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I was born in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and I recently returned back here after living in North and South Dakota for the last 10 years. Growing up, I was the kid who sat on the back hill during recess, and I drew the house behind the school, while everyone else played Red Rover. At that age, I didn't know what an architect was. I just loved to draw, and I was always scribbling and sketching. I got interested in architecture during an 8th grade tech ed class when we made a blueprint of our CO2 derby car. We drew it out on the vellum, fed it through the ammonia machine, and there was something about watching this drawing become something else that I clung on to. I was really fortunate to have architecture classes available to me in high school. I took them from freshman to senior year. I had a fantastic teacher who pushed me and got me involved in a state architecture competition, which gave me exposure to the field at an early age. From that first drafting class, freshman year of high school, I knew I wanted to be an architect. There was never any other option for me. When I started working, I was drawn to working in educational architecture because if I wasn't an architect, I believe I'd probably be a teacher, and this type of work allows me to flex both of those muscles.
Growing up, I didn't know any architects or engineer, and have honestly never truly wondered, like most kids, like who designs buildings, how the city comes about. It never dawned on me that you need someone to design things, but more importantly, that someone had designed and laid out the city I grew up in. And I grew up in a really large city with millions of people. I grew up in San Juan, a city with an international airport literally in my backyard, a reliable public transport system, tall apartment buildings that house a large number of people. I actually grew up in the 10th floor of an apartment building. Killer traffic, cruise ship ports, a historic Spanish settlement with city walls and fortresses. But I never stopped to question how it had all come about, or why the streets of Old San Juan were narrower and made out of cobblestone, but the rest of the island had what I'm going to call normal roads, right, with asphalt, and they were wider, allowing a lot of traffic. My best friend's dad, I was pretty lucky that he was an artist, and I didn't put two and two together, but he taught at the School of Architecture. So she took me there to visit him one day, and my brain nearly exploded. It was the balance between creative and technical that I needed.
My experience, on the other hand, was very different. I grew up in a suburb of Minneapolis, and while I was only 30 minutes or so from a major diverse city, it was rare that I actually went into the city and left the bubble of the suburbs where most things looked pretty much the same. There were wide streets and lots of green manicured lawns. The buildings around me growing up weren't inspiring. They were bland, and neighborhoods were filled with cookie cutter houses and big box stores. And while I had exposure to design thinking at a young age in high school, I had not yet been introduced to design influence. It didn't occur to me that design could elevate the experience we have as we move through the world, until I went to college and started actually studying design and having conversations about urban planning.
So what does your typical architect look like? Everyone's idea of a basic architect is pretty much the same. It's a homogenous thing, right? It's a white guy dressed all in black, wearing funny glasses, good at math and good at sketching. I'm pretty good at math, but I prefer math that's logical. Like geometry makes perfect sense to me. And I was good at math, but I was also the kid who had to figure out a different way to solve the problems because the traditional strategies that we were given didn't stick in my head. So when my oldest daughter, who actually turned 14 yesterday, came home, and I think it was like first grade with some Common Core math, and my husband is pulling out his hair because he doesn't understand how to do this, I was like, yes, that's how I do math in my head. And opposed to Katie, I had to work to force myself to learn how to sketch, how to visually represent an idea. So I'm kind of the polar opposite, or I joke, the photo negative of what your first idea of an architect is. But our profession is changing. I mean, look at Katie and I, right? There are more women in design and construction profession career fields, but obviously that's not enough.
So what does an architect actually do? The first inclination for most people is to say, oh, an architect builds a building, which actually isn't true. We don't build anything. At the most basic level, we create the instruction manual for the contractors to bring the ideas in our head to life. However, the skill sets that we use stretch way beyond anything to do with buildings. A typical week for an architect can include going to a construction site and meeting with a contractor, include picking out carpet samples, reviewing lighting and mechanical layouts, writing a proposal for new work, understanding how a wall is constructed. We analyze acoustics of a theater, and we present ideas to an owner. We're counting toilets and calculating exit widths while creating 3D renderings or trying to figure out what rooms go next to which other rooms. We are using and developing problem-solving skills, public speaking skills, and the value of trial and error. But most importantly, we're learning collaboration skills. The reality is that what we do is rooted in skill sets and interests that are found in common childhood activities. If you ask a room full of architects what got them into architecture, you'll find common themes of kids who played with Legos, kids who built forts in the living room or in their backyard, or challenged the structural stability of spaghetti by building marshmallow towers. You'll find kids who played video games like myself who played The Sims only to build the houses and completely forgot about the characters. These are all activities found in many childhoods, but there are elements of each of these activities that I use every day in my professional life. The very heart of what an architect does is centered around being problem solvers and good communicators. The ability to communicate the idea that is in our heads to someone else, either verbally, through writing, or through drawings, is the most used tool in our toolbox.
As architects, we wouldn't be able to do what we would do without a team, though. And that team includes other architects and engineers who are specialized in their fields. The easiest way for me to explain this most of the time is talking about a head coach. The architect acts like the head coach in football, as opposed to the specialized position coaches and coordinators. Each member of the team, like position coaches, are specialists in their field, like interior designers, acoustical consultants, electrical engineers, fire protection consultants. There's a lot of specialties out there. And the head coach is in charge of putting the game plan for the entire game together. Even though this, I'm going to stop and Kitty and I have been giggling over this slide for a while because nobody needs a hard hat to draw, but it's such a graphic way. Like it's such a, oh, they must be in construction. They have hard hats. But even though most people assume, and the first impression of what architects do is to do with the aesthetics of the building, in reality, by my ethical code, my number one responsibility is ensuring the health, the safety, and the welfare of the people who are inside the building, and actually the spaces surrounding it as well. Health includes the aspects of the work involved in improving the physical, emotional, and social well-being of the occupants, users, and anybody else affected by the building or the site. Safety has to do with protecting occupants, users, and other people affected by the building sites from harm. Welfare involves aspects that enable equitable access, elevate the human experience, encourage social interaction, and benefit the environment. An architect accomplishes all of these goals with a holistic approach and taking the role of lead coordinator between all the different specialized disciplines, not unlike the head coach. An engineer is going to assist in the execution of the architect's plans, determining what is physically possible within the realm of their expertise, like what materials can be used, how issues of practicality could be resolved, but not one team member could actually design a complete building without collaborating with others who have complementary expertise.
What Patri's talking about is key, because while the health, safety, and welfare of the public is our number one responsibility, as architects, we strive to create spaces that not only provide those things, but that also inspire. Architecture is as much about the experiences we create within a space, from the personal to the communal, as it is about making the building work.
I really like when kids ask me what I do. I tell them that I'm part of a big group project, right? Like I'm part of a team who designs a building. And that's a relationship that they can make between a school project, having different team members and everybody having to split the work, from what an architect and the different engineers do. And it's interesting because Katie and I were just talking about this. We hear it a lot from kids and even some adults, like, I would have loved to be an architect, but I wasn't good at math, or I couldn't sketch. And those are really all myths, right? Expression can happen in a lot of different ways. And you as teachers just do a great job at encouraging self-expression in students, and we need to continue doing that. For example, Frank Gehry, who has designed some of the most iconic buildings of our times, is not exactly like a pristine sketcher, right? Like when you hear of somebody doing beautiful sketches, this is not what comes to mind. But he has a style, and his form of expression is very clear. And clearly, he has figured out a way in which his team is able to deliver to that vision. From that sketch to what the Disney concert hall ended up turning out to be, there's not a lot of difference there. But even, and I love this because even with all that shiny metal and the playful swooping curves, his building still rests on items of practicality, right? You need egress doors, you need escape stairs. I bet this building has bathrooms. There's heating and cooling ducts hiding in those nice wood-looking columns.
This is why it's important for us to assemble a team around us who all support the same vision. The functional should support and enhance the experience. No one is good at everything, and collaboration is more important than ever in today's rapidly changing world. You're preparing students for jobs that don't exist right now, and students need to be adaptable to whatever is thrown at them so that they're ready for those futures. So I'm an architect. I'm a wannabe teacher, but I'm also a huge musical theater nerd, and I get a lot of inspiration from how theater creatives interact and collaborate with each other. Putting together a successful production requires all the members of the company and the creative team using their skills to build on each other and move the story forward in a meaningful way. For example, in Hamilton, the bass line is started in Lin-Manuel's words, and the music director, Alex Lacamoire, elevates those words with layered orchestrations that reinforce what's happening in the lyrics. Then, the choreographer, Andy Blankenbuehler, takes those words and orchestrations and makes physical representation of them through movement. The set designer, David Corrins, creates the world that all the characters will move through and reinforces the cyclical relationship between characters by adding a turntable to the stage, which then impacts how Andy choreographs and how Alex orchestrates. Overseeing all of this is the director, Tommy Kail, and his job is to make sure that all the pieces come together to serve the ultimate story. The final product that we see would not be what it is without all of them and many, many others bringing all their gifts to the table in service of telling the story. The same is true in architecture. I'm not particularly passionate about the technical things that go into a building, but I'm really good at and I'm really passionate about how people move through space and respond to a space. As someone who works in schools, my interest lies in understanding how learning can shape space and how space can shape learning. So I rely on others, my engineers, my teammates who are more technically inclined, and my designers to help make sure we create a successful space that all reinforces the same goal. We all have our own strengths that we can bring to the table. We don't have to be good at everything because there are so many ways to celebrate your individual strengths when you work as part of a team. If everyone on my team had the same skills and interests as me, it wouldn't work. It's only when we have a diverse team of people, those who fit the preconceived idea of an architect and those who don't, bring all their skill sets together that we can get truly great design.
So now that we have a sense of how an architect is born and nurtured, we can go into what it means to be an architect. As an architect or engineer, it's just really easy to do a lot of what we call head-down work on a project, obsessing over every single detail, making sure the sketch is perfect, and not really look outside of the profession for input. To me, I would be lacking in my duties if I didn't consider the consequences of what plopping a new building in an existing neighborhood might have, right? Or what dropping a building in the middle of nowhere might mean, or how it might impact the spaces around it. Later on, we're actually going to talk about something called probable future, and we're going to talk about intent and consequences. So keep these two examples of the Royal Ontario Museum and this Prada store in Marfa in mind. Truth is that design and construction professionals have a large amount of responsibility, or some may call it social influence, right? What we put on paper more often than not is going to be built, and buildings will outlast us. Some of you might work in buildings that are 100 years old. Our work is permanent, and that's a lot of responsibility to carry, and that's why we're so thoughtful about it. And inevitably, what we build is going to impact people for generations to come, and that impact, we have a choice whether we make it positive or we make it negative, and it is going to change the cities that we live in.
So because there is a lot of responsibility in being an architect, the process to becoming one is long and rigorous and includes going through a professional architecture program, completing a required number of hours for experience in the field, and passing 6 licensing exams. Architecture education traditionally is a 5 to 7 year program that includes undergrad and graduate school, resulting in a professional degree. Without a professional degree, you can't become a licensed architect. And most states around us have universities and colleges that offer architecture programs like SDSU, NDSU, Montana State, Bozeman, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and University of Minnesota. Typical courses in architecture include a history class so that we can learn what has been done and what impact it's had on civilization. We also have many classes that surround the topic of building technology, which gives us an understanding of heating and cooling systems to create a space that's comfortable for the occupants. It includes understanding building safety systems that protect people in case of a fire so they can egress safely from the building, or that we can make sure that fire hoses can reach the right critical locations. Building technology also includes materials and construction methods. We need to understand that construction materials perform differently under different environments. For example, in Puerto Rico and in tropical climates, it's rare to build out of wood because of termites and hurricanes, whereas we see wood commonly used here in the Midwest. We also study structural systems to understand not only what materials can do, how much weight they can support, but to learn what makes buildings stand up and, more importantly, stay up. The place where all of these things come together is called studio, and that's where we learn how design really works. It's really a lab for experimentation where we test out ideas, learn how to solve problems, and learn to collaborate with our peers. It's pretty much a big kids makerspace with power tools. Architecture education doesn't necessarily teach you how to be an architect. That only really comes when you're in an office and actually practicing architecture. But what architecture education is really all about is teaching the importance of divergent thinking and producing several possible correct answers to the singular problem presented to us.
Okay, so I'm good at math, and I taught myself how to sketch, right? But the trait that I think that naturally makes me a good architect is that I'm just good at empathy, like that human connection, understanding where other people are coming from, what their needs are, and how they feel. And when I take that gift, like that superpower, and I translate empathy into architecture and the built environment, right? Like the neighborhoods and the houses and streets and parks, empathy really becomes understanding how spaces make you feel or make other people feel, how they make you behave. Architecture has a ton of influence and power of how we use a space, how we can connect with people in a space, how we move inside it, and even how we can feel inside that space. Architecture is all about being able to layer a lot of requirements and guidelines and restrictions, like things that we might think is a lot of like red tape and oversight, but putting it in an elegant way that achieves the user goals and that still protects that health, safety, and welfare. For example, the daylight bathing the interior of the Oculus in New York improves the occupant's physical and emotional well-being. You're coming from the bowels of the city subway system, and you're coming out into this beautiful, bright, like sun-bathed space. There are safety measures built into the design to protect users from unthinkable circumstances. I mean, this is just a block away from Ground Zero, and the elegance of the space just really elevates the human experience. My job is to deliver to that standard and to juggle all of these things and prioritize and negotiate between them. Architecture is really about problem solving, but the ultimate goal is to elevate and enrich people's lives. And because for the most part, buildings don't exist like that Marfa Prada store in isolation, it really has a lot to do with creating better communities.
So last Christmas, I took a week off. I was actually going to relax at the end of the year. And by the end of the week, I was tired of sitting around and not really challenging myself. My dad pulled out a puzzle and I attacked that thing with enthusiasm, getting a good portion of it complete within a matter of hours. My family commented that they didn't realize I liked puzzles so much. And it dawned on me that putting puzzles together is literally what I do every single day. And I'd been missing that piece of the puzzle, so to speak, in the time that I had taken off. Every day I'm given guidelines for a project, and it's my job to look at all the pieces that need to go into that space and make them fit in a way that works best for the people using it. So what's the puzzle that I work with every day? Well, for me, it's schools, and my puzzle pieces consist of classrooms, staff workrooms, small group rooms, science lab gymnasiums, cafeterias, on, and all those pieces that you are readily familiar with. And the way in which these pieces fit together is shaped and influenced by our time and the social changes happening around us.
So in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And it really changed the way that buildings were designed to respond to a more diverse need, like a broader view of the population. We started recognizing that there were different levels of ability that also deserved the same rights of being in buildings as people with able bodies had. The change created new codes and guidelines for architects, and we started seeing a new language come up in spaces: grab bars in bathrooms, accessible routes, communication elements like signage that include visual elements or braille. And while the ADA has improved the way buildings are designed by providing equitable access for the disabled population, we consider these things a code minimum. These items meet the law intent, but not always meet the need. And sometimes we need to go a lot further to meet all of the needs.
The typical classroom size has pretty much stayed the same over the years. Maybe we've gotten a little bigger in the last few, but that's because we're recognizing the need to do more within that space. There's been a noticeable shift within the classroom over the last few years as we see a shift from more rigid arrangement that we've seen for decades, rows perfectly aligned, stage on the stage, to something more flexible and organic. This shift is a reflection in the change in the workplace environment that kids need to be prepared for, but also reflects the understanding that one size fits all approach doesn't work for everyone. We're embracing the fact that different learning and teaching methods exist, and so there needs to be different spaces that reflect that as well. Public restrooms are a puzzle piece that are in many different building types, and they're a basic need. But as progressive society recognizes the non-binary nature of gender, we as designers and users have recognized the difficulties that traditionally segregated restroom facilities present to some members of our society. Facilities that were originally created to prevent discrimination on the basis of gender present new challenges with today's understanding. We're seeing a shift towards more gender-inclusive restroom facilities as a way to provide safer and more welcoming facilities. All of these changes come from designers talking to diverse groups of users and understanding the priorities of the community. When we see social change happening, it's up to us to recognize that our buildings have to change too.
So once we really understand the impact that we can have in the spaces we design and build, and how people feel and perform within those spaces, it's not a leap. It's fairly logical to see the value that a design professional and a construction professional can have in different realms of the community, and how their work can influence social change. Social change, that we keep throwing that term around, is defined as an alteration of the social order of society. It can include changes in institutions, behaviors, and relations. Understanding that design professionals have a lot of influence in leading and advancing changes in society, and also understanding that our work is 100% physical. It is built, it is concrete, and it is permanent. It is definitely our duty to do better. And here's where you come in. We need your help. You are our first line of defense of contact with the future by encouraging kids of every walk of life to consider a career in design or construction. And that is the preferred future. So we're going to bring it home now, right? We're going to talk about that value of diversity. And this is our ask to you. This is like the challenge to do better. Let's talk about the future in terms of the present. Here we are now. For the sake of the simplicity of this presentation, we're going to talk about three futures. There's a possible future, which is based on possibility, of course, and this is the future that could happen. Then we're going to talk about, there's also the consideration of the probable future, which is based on probability, and it's the future that might happen. And then there's the preferred future, where there is intent. This is that designed future. this is what we want to happen. And when we're talking about the Prada store on the roadside in Marfa, or the addition to the Royal Ontario Museum that to me looks like a bug from outer space that came in to try to swallow this perfectly nice little traditional museum building, we're talking about intent. That architecture, that building was the result, the future that those designers selected. That was their preferred future. The preferred future is also about understanding the consequences and opportunities, like we're saying. A future where we are considering the implications of what we do and how we do it. And because of the weight of the social influence that we have been talking about and the permanence of what we do, it is really important to keep in mind who we encourage and we elevate to these positions. This preferred future is only possible with a diverse group of voices at the table. Diversity presents itself in different forms, and we're very familiar with that, right? Education diversity, cultural diversity, socioeconomic, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, ability diversity. Diversity is only the start of it, right? Like, diversity is it's almost like a noun, where inclusion is actually the action, it's the verb. So in order to put diversity into action, we need to talk about that inclusion. And if we think of diversity of like the puzzle pieces that Katie and I have been talking about, inclusion is really putting those puzzle pieces together. So let's make this concrete. The 1960s saw the design of the first seatbelt, which was made to male specifications. So when your grandparents tell you that they brought your mom or dad home in a cardboard box and they put it in the backseat of the car, they're probably not exaggerating by a ton. And that seatbelt, because it was designed to male specs, the consequences was that female drivers were more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash. The reason for the inequitable results between men and women that were involved in car crashes wasn't luck, is because the crash test dummies were modeled after the average male with its height, weight, and build. And you can see it there on the side, it's the 50th percentile dummy. This meant that seatbelts were designed to be safe for men, and for years we drove and rode around in cars that were very unsafe for women, especially pregnant women. Because of this design choice, women were actually 47% more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash. And this is starting to shift, but it wasn't until 2011 that the first female crash test dummy was required in safety testing. And still we have a lot of ways to go with this, because as you can see also on the other side of the slide, the female crash test dummy is based on the smallest fifth percentile of the female population, which is 108 pounds and 4 foot 11 inches tall. So we're not even equitably represented in the safety design of something we're in every single day. So how do we become more inclusive? And participation is really one of the solutions. One of the things that I really admire about the Black Hills, and it's one of the reasons why my husband and I decided that we wanted to make the Black Hills in South Dakota home, is that there's this sense of community service that permeates everywhere you go. And one of the advantages of being in a small city or in a relatively rural state like South Dakota is that we can find a lot of pride of place and belonging translating into serving on boards or committees.
It's important that young people see the value in this, that they see their parents and mentors being part of things, and that they themselves belong to clubs and committees early in their lives. The value to me is not in the added line on the resume, but it's keeping in mind that when people share their gifts, the added value goes back to the organization that they're part of. This extends past design and construction professionals, of course. For those of you who serve or have served on boards, you can recognize that every board needs the insights that someone in education can bring to the table, or the ideas of an accountant or an attorney. For design construction professionals, to share our gifts helps organizations look at things from a different perspectives. We help bring understanding of the built environment and the advantage of design thinking, or divergent thinking, if you will. We all know there are many ways to get involved in the community. Some ways we do this is by volunteering at girls' STEM events, so we can introduce young girls to things that got us into architecture and design. We go into school classrooms and explain to students what an architect does and give them a hands-on activity so they can feel it for themselves. We partner up with other national organizations and other trades to build awareness of allied professions in the community through activities like Black Kids Competition in Sioux Falls. Introducing kids to design thinking and the design fields at an early age is an easy way towards bringing more voices to our table. Everyone brings a different perspective to the built environment, and everyone understands the built environment differently. Architects play a role in shaping the experience someone has in the built environment. So we need diverse points of view within the field of architecture to make sure that more perspectives are represented. Having a variety of ideas and backgrounds represented from the beginning results in a better designed project and a better designed community that represents its people. Making design equitable has to do with allowing more voices to inform the decisions.
So in design, challenging what we know creates better buildings for the future. And by challenging what we know about ourselves can create a better future. So if we go back and we remember the roots that we talk about architecture, the Legos and the tree forts and the spaghetti and the marshmallows and the Sims and Fortnite, all of those things are accessible to most children in some way, shape, or form, right? But along the way, somehow we forget that marshmallow towers are really architecture. So this is our ask to you. We ask that you encourage the dreamers and builders and inventors and call them architects. We encourage them to see themselves as designers of their own worlds. If those worlds look a little bit different or seem a little stranger, even better. There's just something, there's a kernel there, right, that we need to strive to understand. The kids sketching relentlessly all over the homework page, I have one of those, like, we need those. What are they seeing that we are not? What are we missing? The skateboard carpenters, we need those too. And the native jingle dressmakers, we need way more of those. Can you imagine how beautiful our world would be if we enabled all of them and empowered them? We need your help to encourage students to see themselves as architects and designers and inventors. And I love that little kids use the word inventor. Inventor is just a cool word for an engineer or an architect or whatever it is, right? It's getting things done. It's putting it from your head into the built form. And there are ways to help. Whether in your classroom or our offices, the door is always literally or figuratively open. And one thing that I know for sure is that architects like to talk a lot, and we like to talk a lot about the work that we do. And we're so proud of what we do, and we're so happy to share that with all of you. So we would like you to just call on us and invite us into your classroom and let us dream new worlds with all of you. Thank you.
If there are any questions, feel free to populate it in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer.
Or if anybody has any comments, we're happy to chat.
All right, so we've got a question from Donna about folks who build and design their own spaces, and what could she suggest when they consider building a new school. So I think the key with that is really understanding where you want to go in the future. What do you want your spaces to be able to do for you? Right now, the key in education design is really focus on flexibility, so that it becomes kind of a buzzword, but truly that's what we're focusing on when it comes to school design these days, is understanding that you guys have an insurmountable task ahead of you of preparing kids for jobs that don't exist. And how do you do that when you don't know what that's going to be? The key to that is creating space that's flexible, not maybe relying less on built-in bookcases and casework and more on flexible furniture that allows you to create multiple stations throughout a room, or recognizing that maybe a teacher doesn't own a room, but you move from different rooms to best support this, what needs to happen in that lesson. You know, maybe it's a—
Katie, I'm going to add to that flexibility right now with COVID.
Yes.
I mean, I live in Rapid City. We're fighting through the new school plan coming out. Flexibility is key. It is the biggest thing that is going to help schools right now. So for them to be able to build as much flexibility within their spaces and their systems, it's going to be part of the success. And Katie, the other thing I think is community input.
Yeah.
I mean, if they are building their own schools for their own communities, making sure that they invite a lot of different voices and hear what it is that the community values is pretty important as well.
Absolutely. So we have another question about coming to present this fall. Absolutely.
Yes, we're here.
We would love to come talk to your class. So we can certainly find a way to get you our contact information, and we can set something up. I think that'd be fun.
So in the resources tab is my email. So just please contact us that way.
Yeah.
Amy, we don't have any other questions. Do you have any questions for us, Amy?
There we go. I'm finally unmuted. I don't do well when they silence me. All right. No, thank you. That was wonderful. One thing these sessions are going to be archived till the end of the month, but then you guys could save them and you could share clips of this or, the whole thing or whatever in your classroom too. So as I was listening to this, I was thinking of how great that would be, just that we already have this resource. And they are located in Rapid City, and we have people from throughout the state here, but especially this year, you could throw these up on your smart board and have a Zoom virtual speaker and make things much more efficient for everybody in this time. And so thank you so much. So many good things to think about as we talk about design.
If there's any way that we can help support your curriculum and come into your classroom, we would love to do that. We'd love to be that resource for you guys. And, maybe we talk a couple times and work on an extended project together. We would love that.
We have a great question on the chat box about suggestions for hands-on activities that we can spark the interest of students. And Katie and I have essentially a toolbox of these things. So Patrick, if you can contact us, we're super happy to share. Right? Like, it starts with just even having kids in grid paper draw what their bedroom looks like, and then imagine what their ideal bedroom looks like. It starts with just this kernel of understanding little things, like the door has to open. So, the bed can't be in the way of the door, just these little things that start sort of clicking. And it's all about putting that puzzle together for them. And in architecture, as in everything we do, one of the interesting things that I find is that we notice when things don't work. Good architecture, I'm going to say good, basic architecture, you don't notice it, but you notice when there's something wrong with it. So it's interesting to pay attention to that as well.
If you do have some of those toolboxes already created, if you want to just zip it to me in an email, I could put it in the resources folder too on the website.
Great, we'll gather some stuff for you.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. And Brianna, she's the one that was moderating this session. She is our career specialist with the Department of Ed that oversees the architecture and construction cluster. So you may hear from us again. We love to team up with industry professionals. So we will definitely tap you in the future.
We definitely like talking a lot.
All
So
right.
we're good. I'm going to say that one of the challenges that we're going through right now with all the social change is that architecture and construction seem like such an elitist profession, and the same for engineering. And we're trying to dismantle that myth. The more varied voices that we have at the table, the better our communities are going to be. A lot of times we design things and we don't understand the unintended consequences of what it is, right? Because we don't bring everybody to the table. So when we were talking about the Hutterites bringing the community to the table, could you imagine if that community like needed a gathering space and the school ended up becoming part of that? So the more inclusive we can be of a lot of voices, the stronger the end result is definitely going to be.